This outdoor lounge setting is in serious need of a makeover. It's tired and damaged and just calling out for some help. I am going to be restaining all of the timber and painting the fabric. Yes, you heard that right, I am going to be painting fabric. Did you know you can actually do that? And you're not going to believe the end result. It is such a dramatic transformation and you can take steps away and copy them and put your own creative spin on it. So let's dive into the tutorial. I started off by getting out all of the supplies that I needed. All of the supplies are linked down in the description so you can go and find exactly what products I used for this makeover. I took all of the cushions off the couch and then put them in the washing machine to give them a nice deep clean. Because most people's outdoor furniture is actually outdoor, it's exposed to the elements and can get quite damaged. If not regularly cleaned, it can also become a bit of a breeding ground for things like spiders. So my first job was to get the broom and go through and remove all of the spider webs. This video is also going to feature my dogs Milo and Jet, because whenever I am outside working, they are there with me, making sure to stay nice and close. Once I removed the bulk of the spider webs with the broom, I then thought I was just going to drag all of this furniture out onto the lawn and give it a nice hose down. I probably could have just kept sweeping to get rid of all of these spider webs, but honestly, they were stuck underneath all of the grooves and I thought it was just going to be so much faster to get the hose out and just hose them all off. The furniture was going to get wet anyways because I needed to do a deep clean with a degreaser before I could actually start painting it, so it just made more sense to give it the hose down. When cleaning with the degreaser, I chose to use a crystal degreaser, which I just mixed with water. I added some of the crystals and just stirred that all together and then started to scrub down all of the furniture to remove any grime that was on there. To start off with and get the bulky component, I used the broom with the degreaser and gave it a good scrub. And then once I'd finished with the broom, I just got out a regular household sponge and started to scrub down all of the little bits with the household sponge. While our timber was then drying out after it had been cleaned, I decided I was going to give all of the concrete a hose and a scrub. Once the timber was completely dry, it was then time to sand it down. Now you need to make sure that it is 100% dry before you do this, because if you do this while the timber is wet, all you're going to do is gunk up your sandpaper and you're not going to be able to actually sand it. I started out with an 80 grit and I started to go over all of the timber. There was quite a fair bit of damage to this timber and quite a lot of the old stain was lifting, so it was quite easy to just then sand over that to remove all of it. I don't actually need to sand this back to raw and remove the old varnish completely. I can actually leave it so the old varnish is there and do more of a scuff sand. This is only because the product that I chose to use enabled me to then use the oil-based varnish over the top of it and it would stick to this and create a new color. It would really depend on what product you chose as to what you needed to do here. If you chose a standalone stain product that didn't have the varnish mixed in and the stain needed to be absorbed into the timber, you would need to do more sanding and sand this back to the raw surface so that the stain would then be able to be absorbed in through the timber. Because I'm using an oil-based product that has a varnish mixed in, it's basically going to be painting that over the top of this. Once everything had been sanded, I then gave it another quick clean and grubbed out my stain. When using a stain and varnish product, you want to make sure you give it a really good stir before you start to apply it, because the two components within the can may have started to separate and it's really important to mix all of those back together before you start painting. Once it's all stirred up, you're going to start to apply this onto the timber. There's a few different ways that you can apply it. You can apply it with just a paintbrush like I did here. Because I have all of these little joins in between the timber, it just seemed a lot easier for me to use the paintbrush and make sure I didn't get any runs. Or you could also use a roller or a spray gun, depending on what product you are using and whether that is suitable to use in a spray gun. A lot of these stain and varnish products you can't actually use in a spray gun, but have a look on the can and see what it is that you're using and whether that's an option for you. For the first coat of the stain and varnish, I did apply it absolutely everywhere. So that's in all of the joins as well, including all of the spots that are not easily visible. I wanted to do this because this is also a protection for the timber to have that varnish on there. But for the second coat, I then only used the second coat on all of the areas that were visible, because the second coat was really just to start to get the color a little bit darker and was more for a visual effect than it was as a protective layer. Now it's time to get started painting fabric. So what I did here for the paint is I used an equal ratio of paint to fabric softener. This is going to stir quite a few feathers because a lot of people don't like fabric softener, but for me it was the easiest way to create a paint that would work on the fabric without going hard and crunchy. I mixed up the paint and fabric softener in a ratio 50-50, as I mentioned, half-half. So I put 4 little cups of paint and then 4 little cups of fabric softener, stirred that all in together, and then started to paint it onto my fabric. Here you'll see me applying the second coat onto the fabric. The first coat did absorb a lot more than I wanted it to into the fabric, and the ratio was a little bit lighter on the first coat. That's why for my second coat, and what I recommend is to do a 50-50 ratio, because you're not going to end up doing quite as many coats as what I did. I also recommend you pick a darker color than what I did. Because I was going from a dark gray to a cream, it was possibly the hardest color paint combination to use, and it did require me to do 4 coats of paint in total to be able to cover this. If I had have used a darker color, I would have saved myself a whole lot of work, because I think if I had have used the darker color, I would have been able to get away with only doing 2 coats of this fabric paint. I moved all the cushions inside my house to do the painting because it was actually winter where I am living at the moment, and it was just way too cold for the paint to dry correctly when I was outside, and it just was going to take way too long for that to dry in between each coat. So I carried them all inside, laid out a whole lot of sheets, and then started painting them inside. Ideally, this would probably be a much better job in summer where you could just leave them out in the sun to dry, but you know, you could do like me and carry them inside if you really wanted to do this as a winter project. Another tip I have here is to do lots of light coats. Don't be tempted to add more paint and less fabric softener, because the more paint you add, the more likely it is to go hard and crunchy and not to be very nice when you're sitting on it. The most common questions I get about painting fabric is all about how hard it goes. A lot of people think that when you're painting fabric, it's going to go really hard and you're not going to be able to sit on it and it's not going to be comfortable anymore. And that is definitely the case if you don't use the fabric softener to mix in with the paint to make it soft and absorb into the fabric. But in all honesty, it does feel a little bit harder once you have painted the fabric than it did originally. So if you want it to be really soft and plush, you may find that this is not a very good option for you, and you may need to look into something like a fabric dye instead. However, for me, I wasn't really worried at all about the fact that adding the paint was going to make the cushions that little bit harder, and it really didn't bother me, so I was happy to paint them. As I mentioned earlier, I ended up needing to apply 4 coats of cream paint to finish off those cushions. I then went back outside and I started to apply the second coat of the oil-based varnish and stain onto the timber. It did need to have 24 hours in between to dry to fully absorb into the timber and dry completely, and then I was able to paint on this second coat. I did kind of touch on it a little bit earlier in the video that when I applied the second coat, I didn't apply the second coat down in between all of the timber grooves, because I really just wanted to make it a little bit darker and have the grey tones come through a little bit more, and the second coat was only going to be applied to all of the spots where it was highly visible. This particular product was really easy to work with. However, sometimes when you're working with an oil-based stain and varnish, it can be easy to get runs. So you just want to make sure that once you've applied the paint and varnish onto the piece, that you go back over it and make sure that there's no drips or runs of paint. As I was painting on the second color of this gray varnish, I was really starting to love how this deep gray was starting to give a really weathered look to this timber. Once I finished the second coat, I then gave it another 24 hours to allow it to dry completely before I put all of the cushions back on and started to put the couch setting back together. It's looking pretty fantastic, but it's not quite done yet. Let's add some styling elements. I got a new outdoor rug to add to the floor. This is going to add so much personality into the space. I also got a whole lot of new outdoor cushions, some in some dark colours to add a bit more depth to the couch. And what's an outdoor space without some beautiful greenery? So I added some pot plants on either side of the couches. Now, let's take another look back at where we started. This is my couch setting before, and this is it now. It is a completely new setting, and you would have no idea that this setting was completely refurbished for only $300 worth of products and supplies. I've been upcycling and doing DIY projects for years, and I am still surprised at how amazing some of the projects turn out. Let me know what you think of this makeover down in the comments, and you can check out the $50 outdoor dining table makeover that I did just here.